Well, that was pretty powerful. But let me bring you back to this moment. Because yes, everything the good pastor urged us to do, we must do. But we will never be able to do any of that if we let our democracy fail. We saw what happened a year ago. I don't know if you were watching, but I was dumbfounded. You know, we've all watched movies where bad things like that happened, but this was real, and it was in real time. Our country was under attack by a maniac, by someone of criminal mind, of evil intent, who had been able to foment this big lie. That is the big lie. The big lie. This man, this thing, lost the election and refused to accept the democratic principle of transferring power as a result of a vote and not as a result of violence. And so I stand before you today wearing my favorite American flag scarf because this is my country. This is our country. And we are not going to let the voice of tyranny, totalitarianism, hatred, bigotry, ignorance take over our country. That's why we're here tonight. And we have got to step forward. We have got to fill the void. You know, there's an old expression, I think it was in an old cartoon called Pogo, so some of you may know how old I am, where he says, what are you going to do? You going to believe me or your own lying eyes? We saw what happened a year ago today. We saw the attempt to take over our country by ill-meaning, ill-intended people who do not believe in democracy. It is our fundamental principle, and I am not a big fan of Liz Cheney's politics. I don't think she and I agree on much of anything. But I do agree with her, and I commend her when she says the Republican Party has a choice to make. We can either be loyal to our Constitution or loyal to Donald Trump. We cannot be both. That is the voice of democracy. Whether we agree on principles and issues, we all must come together and agree that our democratic system of government must survive. And it will only survive if we do things like pass the Voting Act. And so I urge each of you to write letters. Now, we're in California. We have not only promoted voting, we are a state that will now vote all by mail. This is extraordinary and something that should be the law of the land. But what the big liars have done is they have used as an excuse all this so-called fraud that never happened. I don't know about you, but the only few cases I've heard when ballots were miscast were people who are actually voting for Donald Trump. So the fact is that we are living in a country where there is an attempt to undermine the right of the people to vote with a big lie. And we have got to make sure that doesn't happen. We've got to demand, and the point was that for something as important as the vote, we have got to get rid of the filibuster. It is critically important if we want to retain our democratic principles and our democracy. And that was discussed, and I thank Salud for his excellent remarks. I told him he's almost coming up to Jackson level. Almost. But the fact of the matter is we need to keep supporting our democratic principles. And I want to end with something. I'm a big fan of words. Words matter. And what has happened is today, in fact, instead of addressing this attempt to undermine democracy, our Republican colleagues have ignored it and said, well, you know, Biden hasn't done this, and this is just an excuse to cover up Biden's errors and his mismanagement. That is absolutely false. First, last, and always in this country, if we are going to survive, is we need to protect the right of everyone to vote. It is that simple. But in that process, let's talk about the accomplishments of this Biden administration. Let's talk about the positives. The fact that through this administration, there was a $1.9 trillion COVID relief package so that we don't have even more people living out on the streets, so that we don't have even more children going without food. We have the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill to rebuild this country. We have ignored our own infrastructure for far too long as we have put money into fighting wars in other countries. We're bringing it back, and because of the Biden administration, there is $1 trillion in an infrastructure bill that is now the law of the land. Biden has now been able to have 40 federal judges who have now been approved and will be sitting on the federal bench, something that is more than what Trump was able to undermine in his 4 years. Unemployment has dropped to 4.2%, unheard of during COVID, and 72% of the population of American adults have been fully vaccinated. You remember a year ago, the denial of COVID, 800,000 American lives later. COVID is still here, and yet we have an administration committed to protecting its people and getting people vaccinated. And we are recommitted through this administration to addressing the scourge of climate change, which has impacted us throughout the country, certainly here in California and around the world. So, I'm supposed to ask you, motivate you, move you, inspire you to do something, because where we are now is we are falling into an abyss, and we cannot let that happen. Go out, speak to your friends, tell them about the accomplishments. Speak to people you know who live in other states. Democracy is so critically important. We've got to pass these various voting rights acts. We've got to make sure our Congress people know this, that our senators know this. If you know anybody in West Virginia, make sure that they are well aware that most of the people of this state support the principles and the items in Build Back Better, and Mr. Manchin had better get off his duff and help us pass that legislation. We can do it. We must do it. Democracy depends upon us. Thank you.
And with that, we tell you, go do it. There are flyers here that you can take.